On today's show, why the Rockets should not trade Alperen Şengün for Giannis Antetokounmpo, and the one scenario where a Giannis trade maybe makes sense for Houston. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, the #1 sports podcast network. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade rumors as they relate to the Houston Rockets and why Houston should absolutely not be looking to trade Alperen Şengün for Giannis. We're going to unpack this rumor from a few different angles. We'll look at the on-the-court potential product. We'll look at some of the financial stuff behind it. And we'll also get into the one maybe slim chance scenario where a Giannis trade would make sense for the Rockets. So I got a lot to unpack on this episode. First, I want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being one of our awesome everydayers. All right. My message, just so that it doesn't get twisted at any point throughout the podcast. The Rockets should not trade Alperen Şengün for Giannis Antetokounmpo. I'm saying that from the jump right now. That is my stance, so you don't have to question where I'm going with this. Because there may be a couple points throughout this episode that I play a little bit of devil's advocate, and I'm like, well, I could see it from this perspective. My stance is don't make the trade. I think it would be a mistake. Just want to clear that out right now. But it's understandable why it's even a discussion, right? It makes sense. Giannis is a top 3 player right now in the middle of his prime. He's the best two-way force in the entire NBA. He's a two-time MVP. He's a champion. And if you want to be able to win a title, that's a pretty good way to up your chances to win a title, because as phenomenal as Alperen Şengün has been this season, the fact that he has cemented himself as one of the 15 best players in the NBA this year, playing at an all-NBA caliber level this season, arguably an MVP caliber level, depending on who you talk to. He's still not Giannis, because Giannis is one of one. There's only one Giannis in the entire NBA, and there's a reason that he's still a top 3 player right now, and will likely continue to be a top 3 player, or at bare minimum a top 5 player, for at least the next 2-3 years. It seems like the type of move that a team would make if they wanted to go all in and push all their chips to the center of the table and try everything they can do to win a title, right? Here's the rub. The beauty, I don't know how many times I've talked about this on this show and various other platforms. The beauty of the Rockets making the Kevin Durant trade was not because they viewed this season or the next couple years with Kevin Durant as some type of all-in championship or bust move, right? They believed that Kevin Durant gave them a chance to win a title in the here and now, while also elevating all of the other young players that they have. And then there will be a transitional period where, as the young players grow and continue to blossom into their respective, career paths, we're seeing Alperen Şengün taking that all-NBA leap this season. Hopefully, Amen Thompson follows suit. Reed Shepherd has some stardom potentially down the line, depending on what his game continues to grow into. All these different factors, right? This is not a Rockets team that is only going to be good for the next 2 or 3 seasons, and then once KD decides to hang him up, it's game over and they're back to rebuilding. The Rockets have right now the blueprint for long-term sustainable success in play. And so why would you uproot that unless you thought it was a surefire chance at winning a title? And I'm not fully convinced that just upgrading Alperen Şengün to Giannis is a surefire championship guarantee, in part because the Thunder are very good. The Nuggets are also very good. And it would leave the Rockets. I don't know that the fit necessarily is the best at the end of the day. But and the the gulf between where Giannis is right now as a player and where Alperen Şengün is right now as a player from a productivity standpoint, from a sheer impact standpoint, all the metrics you want to look at, they're not that far off. Like Giannis is still in a tier of his own. He's in that tier, that very special tier alongside SGA and Luka, as far as like those are the guy at the top of the NBA, right? But Şengün isn't that far off from doing what Giannis does kind of on a nightly basis, or from at least dominating games on a night-to-night basis. And again, this isn't me saying that like, oh, Şengün may never be better than Giannis, right? But he's also still only 23 years old and he's getting better. Meanwhile, Giannis is 31, the wrong side of 30. And who knows what Giannis's game looks like when he eventually hits his athletic decline, given how much his athleticism is a focal point of his game and how reliant he is on his athleticism as a 7-foot-tall freak of nature that is bigger and stronger and faster than everybody else that he plays against on the floor. Who knows what his game ages like over these next few seasons, right? Giannis may hit a wall where he just drops off at some point, whereas Şengün is on the upward ascension of his career arc. And so just from a strictly basketball perspective, I'll get into the numbers and the financials and where there's a lot of different ways to unpack this trade. But strictly from a basketball perspective, I think it'd be way too difficult on the fly in the middle of a season. It's hard as hell to pull these kinds of trades off, these like superstar blockbuster acquisitions in the offseason, and then get all the pieces integrated in time for the season and get guys gelling and cohesive and get the chemistry going. Hell, we're seeing it right now with Kevin Durant and the Rockets, right? The Rockets are still working on integrating Kevin Durant and getting everybody else accustomed to playing off of a superstar. And how do they, pick and choose their spots? And how does KD factor in when to take over games and when to facilitate and when to look to get other guys involved? And, they're all still learning each other at this point. Now imagine trying to factor in another star, but I don't know. It doesn't make sense from that perspective. And I also think that stylistically, right? Like, Giannis and Şengün play two very different brands of basketball. They're both very, you put the ball in their hands, they can dominate the game, and they impact the game in different ways. I think that Alperen Şengün is a superior playmaker. Giannis is a superior defender. Giannis is a downhill threat. Giannis is an offense unto himself the same way that Alperen Şengün is. In fact, they're actually not that far off. When you look at here's a fun set of stats for you this season. As far as the 10 players who've been doubled on the highest percentage of their touches this season, along with the outcomes of said touches, Giannis is being doubled on about 25.5% of his touches this season. That far and away leads the NBA. Alperen Şengün is being doubled on a little more than 18% of his touches. But as far as the outcomes of these double teams, SGA leads the league at 1.34 points per possession when he's getting doubled. Giannis is second at 1.27 points per possession. Alperen Şengün is third on this list at 1.16. On a list, on a team that features Kevin Durant, Alperen Şengün's getting doubled more often than KD, and the Rockets are flat out crushing those offensive possessions, scoring 1.16 points per possession on them. That's fantastic, right? And he's, again, not that far behind Giannis as far as his impact and how defenses are game planning for him, how they try to take him out of the game, all these factors to consider. And I think with where the Rockets are at, right, with the fact that this season in particular, no Fred VanVleet, Alperen Şengün is essentially this team's lead playmaker. He's their point guard. The offense runs through him, right? I just think that the Rockets would be a worse off team bringing Giannis into the fold. Even if you just did a clean Giannis for Şengün swap straight up, I actually don't know that the Rockets would be better just with that clean swap. I don't, because I don't think stylistically the ways that these two guys play the game and the ways that their teams are built around them respectively would function at quite the same level. I think the Bucks are slightly more equipped to function well with Alperen Şengün, whereas the Rockets, if you were to put Giannis in place of Alp, I don't know that the offense functions the same. I don't know that Giannis and KD are as dynamic of a duo playing off one another as Giannis and as Şengün and KD would be or have been so far this season. And so that's one perspective to look at it, is just, I don't really know that it actually moves the needle enough, if at all, to make the Rockets more of a contender this season. I don't know if it closes the gap between where Houston is at and where OKC is at right now, or where Denver is at. And frankly, it also shortens your contention window for the next, 10 to 15 years potentially, because instead of hanging on to a 23-year-old all-NBA caliber talent, which Alperen Şengün already is, you're cutting your contention window down to the next handful of years between whatever you get left out of Kevin Durant for these final few years of his career and whatever you get out of Giannis Antetokounmpo. And that's it. And to me, that's the biggest barrier to not making that trade is if it doesn't guarantee you a title this season or next season, why would you do that and subsequently shorten your contention window to just these next few years? That part certainly doesn't make any sense to me. And there's a bunch of other reasons why this trade would be improbable, unfeasible. I don't know. It wouldn't work. I want to continue talking about this, and I want to get into some of the financial stuff for this potential deal, as well as the one scenario where a Giannis trade maybe makes sense for the Rockets. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place live bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift, a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, player props that update as different guys heat up. You can bet on next touchdown scorers, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every single possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Remember, the best way to help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. The comments help a ton. I want your comments. I want your thoughts on a potential Giannis for Şengün swap. Again, I am firmly against the idea of it, but I want to hear your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Should the Rockets entertain a Giannis for Şengün trade? Give me your thoughts in the comments. Look, kind of continuing on this same line of thinking here, at this stage in his career, right? He's 23 years old. He's averaging 23, 9, and 7. And one of the biggest, most notable areas of Şengün's career, right, is the fact that he has grown so tremendously as a defensive presence to the point where he is absolutely a plus level defender at this stage of his career. You consistently see him making high level defensive plays at the end of games, in crunch time, that kind of stuff. Is he the same level of two-way force that Giannis is? No. But again, Giannis is Giannis. But at the same time, like, the fact that he's this good at this age already, and the fact that he still has a chance to get better, I mean, he could absolutely be at a stage in his career, a year or two or a couple years from now, whatever, where he's doing, 25, 11, and 8 or something ridiculous, right? And like, at what point, there is a realistic outcome where Alperen Şengün's production either at some point in his career matches or potentially even moderately exceeds what Giannis is doing at his peak. Like, it's not completely unheard of. And with Şengün's archetype of player, I think it's certainly possible. He's 100% going to be a guy that's in MVP discussions for the next 10 years of his career, health permitting. Whereas Giannis is, again, on the wrong side of 30 and has been over the last handful of seasons dealing with injury stuff. He's dealing with injury stuff this season. He hasn't played more than 70 games sorry, I take that back. He's played more than 70 games once in his last 6 seasons. Like, I can just roll down the list and go 63 games, 61 games, 67 games, 63 games, 73 games, 67 games, 17 games played so far this season. He's already missed 8 games this year, and he's missing the next 2 to 4 weeks or something with some minor injury. So whether or not that's a real injury and I want to be traded, get me out of here injury, TBD. But anyways, I really do struggle to see an outcome where this Rockets team is better both in the here and now with Giannis and down the line. Because the reality of the situation is, and this is the thing, is I was struggling to think about it even just from a sheer Giannis Şengün swap straight up, right? And I'm still not sold on that. But then you get into the idea of, well, it's a trade and you got to make money work. And that's where the problems start to unfold even more, because the Rockets realistically can't get Giannis just for Şengün, right? They would need to include more money to make the deal work, because Alperen Şengün is making $33.9 million this season. Giannis is making $54 million. So they would have to bridge the gap of $20 million somehow this season with the available salaries on their roster. And if you'll remember from like some of the discussion that we had right after the Fred VanVleet injury, the Rockets can't trade hardly anybody on this roster at present, right? I believe they actually can start trading guys. December 15th is when some of the trade restrictions finally start to lift on certain players. But I can't even remember off the top of my head which players are restricted, which ones aren't, whatever. But just looking at the roster as presently constructed, who would you sacrifice in a trade that's not a key part of this Rockets rotation, and for the team to come out for the better of it, receiving Giannis? Because it would have to be Şengün, and then you got to make up $20 million somewhere. Do you include Steven Adams? Hell no, right? You can't do that. You won't have a starting caliber center. Do you include DFS, who hasn't suited up yet this season? Maybe. I mean, I guess that's one option you go with that doesn't hurt as much. Clint Capela, DFS Clint Capela gets you about $20 million, but because it's an in-season trade, you need to then take back two other names from the Bucks roster. You got to be able to receive, you got to send out as many players as you're receiving back. And so you can't do a 3-for-1 in the middle of the season. So it starts to get really messy, and the whole trade starts to unravel, because realistically, the Rockets would have to give up multiple pieces that they need right now for their depth in order to acquire Giannis in this hypothetical trade. And I definitely think they'd be a worse off team if you had to give up, even if it was just giving up DFS, who hasn't suited up yet this season, and Clint Capela. I mean, Clint's had some good minutes for this Rockets team, but they're expecting to have DFS back, and he projects to be an important part of this rotation. So instead of getting DFS back and losing the depth of Clint Capela, you'd have Giannis, and you'd have a starting lineup of Amen, Kevin Durant, Jabari Smith Jr., Giannis, Steven Adams. You'd be ridiculously big. You'd have Giannis to play through. Like, I mean, Giannis is Giannis, but it also very suddenly throws into question the idea of any kind of potential fit between Giannis and Amen. And that's the other hardcore barrier to this trade in my mind. Moving away from even just the Alperen Şengün stuff and just how good he is in his own right, you start to think about the fit with other players. First off, I said it already. I do not think the fit between Giannis and KD is as good as the fit between KD and Şengün. I don't. They would not be as complementary of each other as players on the floor. And certainly Giannis and Amen would not be as complementary on the court with each other. In fact, because right now, Amen is kind of like a poor man's Giannis with the way that he plays and his entire play style and some of his weaknesses and strengths. And there's a lot of similarities in their respective games. And so that actually brings me to the one scenario in which, because again, I'm firmly against the idea of trading Şengün for Giannis. Completely out on that idea. But that brings me to the one scenario where I could see the Rockets potentially pursuing Giannis, and it wouldn't be able to be in season, period, point blank. It would not happen this year. They would have to hope that Giannis doesn't resolve whatever his frustrations are with Milwaukee and that he gets stuck there the rest of the season. This would have to be something that gets revisited in the offseason. And I say that also in particular because it would give the Rockets more time to make a decision on if they feel like this is the right move or the wrong move. Because ultimately, a lot of ink has been spilled, a lot of minutes have been logged, right, on this podcast and others, talking about Amen Thompson and his role and his future role, right, for this Rockets team and his ability to be an on-ball threat long-term, right? To be a point guard at this level. Can Amen Thompson realize his potential or actualize his potential and become the star level point guard this Rockets organization believes that he can become? And we're seeing that project kind of roll out in real time this year, right? His first year with these heavy increased usage, on-ball reps, everything. And there have been some bumps and bruises along the way. But ultimately, the question then becomes, would you potentially do a Giannis for Amen deal? Would you be willing to make Amen Thompson the cornerstone of a Giannis trade? I'm firmly in the camp that Alperen Şengün is untouchable. And Amen Thompson is borderline untouchable because I still think the world of him, and I think he's got future star potential. And I would hate to move on from a guy that looks like he could easily be one of the top 15 best players in the NBA. The thing about it is that potential, that hypothetical scenario, right? There are a lot of things that have to go right for Amen Thompson to be able to realize that potential and become one of the 15 best players in the NBA. And I could see a world where you could talk me into a Giannis for Amen swap. And again, it would not be straight up. There'd be a lot of other factors you have to consider. And it would have to be, it would have to be this summer. It wouldn't be able to be midseason. So you'd have to hope that everybody else strikes out on the Giannis sweepstakes, that the Bucks just decide, hey, we hate all these offers. We'll revisit it in the offseason when it's easier to deal a superstar. And even then, I don't know that the Rockets would have a more attractive trade offer than some of the other teams that could be potentially in the running. But they could cobble together something like Amen Thompson, Fred VanVleet once he picks up his option for next season, because you need the money to be able to match Giannis's contract, which next year it balloons up to $58 million. But you'd have to do like Amen and Fred VanVleet. And then if you wanted to like get the names off the books that aren't currently big parts of the Rockets rotation, then like DFS and Capela, if you were able to like just go with Amen as the centerpiece and then just fire off as much draft capital as humanly possible, right? Things like the Nets pick, the Suns picks, the future Dallas pick, maybe some of the Rockets' own picks, like just a confetti cannon of all the draft capital in the world to get your hands on Giannis and to potentially outbid other teams, right? Or, and I would hate to go this route, I think this would be the deal breaker for me, or instead of DFS and Capela, you're forced to include Jabari Smith Jr. And at that point, I don't even know if it's worth it at that point, right? Giving up Amen and Jabari to get Giannis, two starting caliber players, one with blossoming star potential, one who is a very high level role player already at the stage in his career in Jabari Smith Jr., a guy that fits into any team construct. Play him down at the 3, play him all the way up at the 5, like so many different things that you can do with Jabari. I'm not even completely sold on this one, but it's at least one scenario worth considering. As slim and as slim of an outcome as it could be, and as unlikely of a scenario as it is, it's at least one worth noting that maybe, right, because Amen isn't at the same level that Şengün is at, right? Şengün has become one of the best 15 players in the NBA. With Amen, it's still a lot of it is about potential, right? We know that he's a DPOY caliber guard / wing defender, and we know what his role can look like when he's being played, in his or being utilized at the best of his abilities, playing off ball, playing out of the dunker spot, all that stuff. So much of Amen's career development is going to depend on what he can look like with the ball in his hands as a true lead guard, lead ball handler, and whether or not he ever realizes that potential and can become, a nightly, 20, 25 point per game scorer, be that downhill threat, that kind of, again, that hybrid between a Russell Westbrook and Giannis type of player. And I'm still not convinced that I would do it, but you'd have to be really intrigued by a team that next season could look like Reed Shepherd, Kevin Durant, Jabari Smith Jr., Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Alperen Şengün. I mean, my God. My God. Like, what do you even do at that point? That team's absurd. You'd be hurting for point of attack defense. I'll give you that much, but I don't know. It's a very interesting set of hypotheticals, and I'm sure it's one that we will revisit and rediscuss as the season progresses. I just wanted to get some initial thoughts out on it here on the show. Wanted to talk about it a little bit. I want your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Coming up, our final segment here, where I want to change gears a little bit and talk about a different name that has become available on the market, and a name that I think the Rockets could potentially look into pursuing. Not that he'll be a complete impact or a difference maker this season, but something for your consideration, an old friend, if you will, of the Houston Rockets. We'll get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. Look, there's no reason to let big wireless drain your wallet, especially during the holidays. Right now, Mint Mobile is running their best deal of the year. All of their unlimited plans are 50% off. That means you can lock in 3, 6, or even 12 months of unlimited premium wireless for just $15 a month. It's the easiest way to take your overpriced phone bill and give it the full Scrooge treatment. And what makes this even better is how simple Mint makes the switch. No contracts, no nonsense, just real savings and real quality service. Switching to Mint lets you keep your same coverage for a lower price. Setup only takes a few minutes. You can bring your own phone and number without any issues. The service is fast and super reliable, even on the go. So turn your expensive wireless present into a huge wireless savings future by switching to Mint. Shop Mint Unlimited plans at mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. Limited time offer, upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent, taxes and fees. Initial plan term only. Greater than 35 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See Mint Mobile for details. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right. If you guessed it, coming into this segment, proud of you. But Clippers have done Chris Paul so dirty, man. That whole situation is so messed up. To send the guy home in what is supposed to be his final season, his farewell tour, if you will, with the Clippers. First off, the Clippers are just a dumpster fire. I'd argue like the Rockets should try and rescue James Harden from the Clippers. And that could be a whole different, have to be a whole different podcast for a different set of days. But right now, Chris Paul is stuck at home because the Clippers said, we don't want you here. Now, the reason the Clippers said they don't want him here is because Chris Paul was being Chris Paul. And I knew that before the report even came out about his interaction with the coaching staff and fellow players. And he was probably in that locker room pissed as hell that they were losing all these games. And understandably so. Chris Paul's a winner at the end of the day. What's the line? He had that one line. You show me somebody who's okay with losing, I'll show you a loser. Like, my goodness, what a bar from Chris Paul. A lot of Rockets fans have taken note of Chris Paul's situation and have brought up the idea of the Rockets maybe bringing Chris Paul back to Houston in large part to be a mentor for Amen Thompson and Reed Shepherd. And I think that given how impactful Chris Paul has been at other stops in his career, mentoring other elite guards in the NBA, guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like Devin Booker, and hell, even, I mean, I know that Harden was like in his prime when Chris Paul came to Houston, but I'm sure that Harden learned a trick or two from CP3 playing alongside the point guard. He's one of the most gifted point guards to ever touch a basketball. And even if the Rockets didn't look at him as, I guess, a true impact contributor or a guy that they feel like can come in. And honestly, I do still think that Chris Paul has got a little bit left in the tank, enough to where if the Rockets wanted a little bit of a break glass in case of emergency type of point guard to be able to throw out on the floor very situationally, a guy that they could potentially rely on in a playoff style atmosphere once they get there to the postseason this year, not being able to have it and then not being able to rely on Fred VanVleet, right? I think that you could do a whole hell of a lot worse than Chris Paul, even at this stage of his career, because he's an incredibly high IQ player. He knows the game, knows how to still impact the game at a high level. And it's not like you'd be asking him to still be prime Chris Paul. You just need him to help set up the offense and play decent defense. And I don't know. I think there's some things that could be, that you could like about that outcome right now. Would the Rockets actively trade something for Chris Paul, hell no. I don't. That's not going to happen. Unless you could. Actually, and I guess technically it would have to work like because he's on a vet minimum deal, right? So it would have to be a situation where you wait for the remainder of the season to hit that point where his like prorated contract amount is less than like what the Rockets have room for in their like cap structure. And then you could like maybe trade like a TPE or something and like absorb him into one of the, I don't even know if the Rockets have any TPEs off the top of my head actually. But you could like trade like a future second round pick or something to acquire. But there's nobody on the Rockets roster that I think Houston would be willing to deal for CP3. But you have to imagine, I mean, like there are other organizations too, like the Thunder I've seen Thunder fans who are like, bring Chris Paul home, bring him back to win a title with SGA because he was the one that kind of like started off this whole rebuild. And I don't know, like the Chris Paul saga is really sad for a lot of reasons. For a franchise's best player, because that's Chris Paul is the Clippers franchise best player, like period. To treat him that way really sucks. And, it's just kind of like a bad look all around for a Clippers organization that already did not have the best PR campaign going on with the whole aspiration and Kawhi Leonard and under the table contracts and all that mess going on over there. So just adding a little bit more fuel to the fire in that regard. But I think it'd be fantastic if the Rockets could somehow pry Chris Paul away from the Clippers, bring him into the fold. And even if he's just here in Houston as a mentor for Reed Shepherd and Amen Thompson, that would go a very long way. Now, I can also hear the other end of the spectrum. Don't bring Chris Paul in. He'd mess with the locker room vibes. Clearly, that's what was going on in LA. Would he be more of a detriment than a benefit? Why do you need Chris Paul trying to coach these two young point guards when you already have Fred VanVleet coaching him up on the sideline? Would Fred VanVleet get offended if you bring Chris Paul in and he suddenly takes the reins on trying to coach up these young guys? I don't know. There's a lot of different other like human factors to consider, but I still can't help but feel like any ounce of knowledge that Reed Shepherd and Amen Thompson could soak up from the point guard himself would help further their respective careers as point guards and as lead facilitators for this team. It's too attractive of an option to not at least consider a little bit if you're the Rockets. And again, especially if you think that he can actually give you something like I think that's the real kind of difference maker here is if you think that CP3 has enough left in the tank to be a contributor in some key moments in a playoff series down the line, it could be maybe akin to, maybe this is a bad comp because Joe Johnson was pretty washed, but like when the Rockets picked up Joe Johnson during the 17-18 year, right? Like Joe Johnson was pretty well cooked at that point in his career, but ISO Joe was still able to check in occasionally and give the Rockets some buckets and give them some play. Like, and it's disappointing that he wasn't able to do that like in the postseason, like against the Warriors. But point being is like, if Chris Paul can still give you, if you think that Chris Paul can even give you 10 minutes a night, 5 minutes a half of solid point guard play, take care of the basketball, get you in and out of sets, play good defense, communicate, help coordinate guys, point things out, keep the team engaged, be an extension of the coaching staff. If you think that he can do any of those things still at a high enough level, then why not go after him, right? Why not bring him into the fold, make him the 15th guy on the roster? He doesn't have to play consistent minutes. He'll get plenty of rest. I don't know. I think there's a lot to like there. I think it's at least something the Rockets should consider. And my biggest thing is I just don't know what CP3's relationship is like, whether or not he's still harboring hurt feelings from the trade all those years ago, being traded for Russell Westbrook and, his contract being regarded as one of the worst contracts in the NBA at the time and all that stuff. So, maybe he's still a little peeved about that and wouldn't even want to consider coming to Houston. But if there's no hurt feelings on either side, and if the Rockets think that CP3 can be a benefit of them for any kind of a postseason push that they're going to make this year, as well as the future development of Amen Thompson and Reed Shepherd, I'd be all for it. But I'm curious your thoughts. Would you like to see CP3 come back to Houston this season? Would you like to see the Rockets rescue him from his Clippers jail cell, if you will, Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. I want to know your thoughts about the Giannis stuff as well. Do you want to see the Rockets go after Giannis, or do you think it's a terrible idea? How do you feel about the one potentially Giannis Amen situation? Yes, no, maybe so. Again, I'm not fully convinced of it either, but at least it's something maybe worth considering. Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.